Hello, Algebra 1 students. Welcome to class this year. I know we're off to a little bit of a different school year again with me not being physically there with you, but thankful to the Lord for technology so I still can be able to teach you from here online. Let's go ahead and open up with a word of prayer and we'll get started right away. Dear Lord, I pray that you would help us this school year. I pray that you would help the students as they listen to the videos, as they learn, as they help each other. I pray that you would help them to be diligent, Lord, in their studies. Help them, Lord, help them not to be nervous with the different situation that we're in. I pray that you would just encourage, that you would help these students to do their best this school year. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Before we get too far, I did want to share a verse with you, a verse that's been an encouragement to me, one of my life verses actually, and that's in Psalm 46:1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And that's just a huge encouragement to me that God is always with us and God is our refuge. A refuge is somewhere that you can run for safety. God is always there for us students. He's never not there. He's always there to help us. He says he's always a very present help in trouble. So even this year, as we venture into Algebra 1 together, some of you might be hesitant. Maybe math is not your strongest subject. Well, please don't go in with I've never done math before, I can't do math this school year. Please start off with the Lord's going to help me. The Lord is my strength. The Lord is my refuge. I can run to him. I can trust him. The Lord is always going to be there for you students. Never will he fail you. So just wanted to encourage you with that this school year, that God is our ever-present help. He's going to be always there for us and always going to help us in trouble sometimes. Not saying that Algebra 1 is going to be in trouble sometime, but different situations in life sometimes can be troublesome, and the Lord is always there to encourage us. Let's go ahead and start this class with looking at some of our policies and procedures. So if we can go ahead and get those passed down, we'll go ahead and go over those together. The beginning paragraph, you can read over that on your own time, just some basic information about class there. I do want to look at the required material list together with you, just some things that you want to bring to class with you, and you do want to bring these to class every day. Okay? There'll be certain days where we'll use some things, certain days we won't use them, but you may not know. So you always want to be prepared with these different items in class. Number one, of course, we'll go ahead and get our textbook in a few minutes, but you want to bring your textbook with you every day to class. We'll talk about our homework together in a few minutes, but usually we'll have time to work on homework, and that will be out of our textbooks. And if you don't have your textbook, you won't be able to work on your homework and use your time well. So please make sure that you bring your textbook with you every day to class. Number two, make sure you have some notebook paper. Of course, you'll be taking notes, or at least I hope you'll be taking notes during class, and then your homework will need to be done on notebook paper as well. Please notice it does say if you use the spiral notebook, and when you go to tear out those papers that leaves those frayed edges, just make sure that you do tear those off and throw them away in the trash can, not on the floor, before you turn those in, so that way it doesn't just create that jumbled mess when we turn in our papers. Number three, I would encourage you to have something to keep yourself organized. A lot of you, I think, already do this. Have some sort of notebook, a 3-ring binder. That way, when it does come in time to turn in papers, to find things, to organize, you're not in a panic of, oh, I know I did my homework, but where did I put it? If you're consistently putting it in your notebook, there should be a problem with knowing where it is there. Number four, I would encourage you guys, especially as this is going to be your first high school credit class, have some sort of assignment notebook to write down what was today's assignment. You may think, oh, I'll remember that, but then you get to study hall, you get home that night, and you're like, I can't remember what were the specific instructions, what was I supposed to do? So please make sure you have some sort of assignment notebook that you can mark down what was today's assignment or what was our homework for today. Number four says a scientific calculator. We won't be using those a ton at the beginning of class, but that's something you want to go ahead and bring with you every day. There will be certain problems where you just type it on your calculator and the calculator does a lot of the arithmetic work for you. Of course, we want to make sure that we're going to understand the process, make sure that our calculator is giving us an answer that seems reasonable and not, well, my calculator gave me the wrong answer. So go ahead and make sure that you do have that scientific calculator. If you're not sure what that means, a scientific calculator is one that has all those different fancy buttons at the top. Probably a lot of them you've never used before. There's a couple buttons at the top. They say sin, cos, and tan. We won't be using those this school year in Algebra 1, but those are some of the buttons that you would see on the top of a scientific calculator. If there is any issue, maybe just your family personally can't afford one, then please send me an email. Please talk to the teacher that's there with you, and we'll do our best to try to accommodate you. Usually they run between about $10 and $15 for these calculators, so do your best to try to have one of those calculators if you don't have one already. Number 6, please make sure that you are doing your work. That's going to be quizzes, tests, and homework. Those need to be done in pencil. Now, you're taking your own personal notes during class. You're welcome to take those in pen. Some students do better with maybe some colors, organizing their notes. Those are your personal notes, and I won't ever collect those. Those are for you. But work that you're going to turn into me, again, that would be homework, quizzes, and tests. I do need you to do that in pencil. Now, I don't want to hear, well, I have an erasable pen, Mrs. Cherry, so I'm going to do it in my erasable pen. I want everything to be done in pencil. The reason for that, we all make mistakes. Even I, as the math teacher who's been doing math for many years, we make mistakes as we're doing our questions, and I don't want to see a bunch of scribbly marks all over our paper. We want to erase. We want to go back and do things correctly. If you are starting to use pen, I'm going to write a note. Please redo this in pencil and then turn it back in. So don't waste your time having to do that and waste my time with having to get back and forth with you. Just go ahead and get in that habit of doing all of your work in pencil. Number 7, please make sure that you have a red pen. On occasion, we'll be exchanging quizzes during class, or when you're looking at your homework, you want to make corrections or will want to grade things in red pen. Notice I said red. That's not purple, pink, blue, orange, or any other color that you might try to use. Please make sure that when we're grading things that you do use a red pen. Number 8, go ahead and make sure that you bring some dry erase markers with you. Those are just those expo kind of markers. You can have any kind. There's the thin markers. There's the ones that are a little bit bigger. Any of those kind are fine. Those will be your markers that you can use. I will have some that the class as a whole can use when we go to the board or when we do work at our desk together. But of course, if you have your own, that makes it easier. We can get things going a little bit faster. So those are just 8 simple things. Again, if there's an issue, you can't get one of those, you're not sure where to find them, send me an email, talk to the teacher that's there with you, and we'll do our best to try to direct you and get everything that you'll need for class this school year. Just 5 simple rules for you as some things that I expect for you from class this year. Number 1, please make sure that you are in your seat ready to go when that bell rings. I know that can be easy. You guys usually are coming in from choir, you're coming in for band, and you haven't been able to talk in there, and now you want to talk to your buddies. That's fine as you're coming in, but please make sure when class does begin, you hear that bell. You're right in your seat. You have your homework out. That's normally going to be the first thing that we go over every day together. So please make sure that you have everything prepared there for me. Please make sure, number 2, it says talking during instructional time is prohibited. What that means, if I'm talking, the teacher there is talking with you, then you should not be talking. If you have a question, we'll talk about this in number 4 here about raising our hand. But if you need to say something, of course, something that's relevant to what we're talking about, then raise your hand. We'll call on you and we'll go ahead and get your question answered. But that's just simple respect that you're listening, you're paying attention, so that way you can do your best this year in class. Number 3, please make sure that you are doing your own work. You may think, I'm just going to copy my buddy's homework for today, but that's not helping you. You're not going to be able to copy your buddy's quiz and test, and that's really going to show up then. So please make sure that you are faithful, you are completing your own assignments, you're doing it your best. I'm not asking for perfection, but I am asking for every student to do their best and to do their own work. Number 4, as I mentioned, if you do need something, just go ahead and raise your hand. Even as something as simple as I need to get out of my seat to go throw something away, I need to get a tissue, just raise your hand, ask for permission to do that. That way you're not just wandering around the classroom. Number 5, please make sure that you stay in your seat the entire time during class. Even if the bell rings at the end, if I'm still finishing something, we're looking at something for tonight's homework, then please make sure that you're respectful. You stay in your seat until I dismiss you. You follow those 5 simple rules and we're going to have a great school year together. I've already mentioned a couple times about some different things with homework. We will have homework probably about 3 or 4 nights throughout the week. I'll try to give you, we of course don't have homework on Wednesdays, and I will try to give you maybe one other day during the week that we won't have homework that you'll have to take home with you. We'll do some work together during class on those days. But notice you can expect homework almost every single day. A lot of that homework will be out of your textbook. That's why we always want to make sure that we have our textbook with us in class. That way you can complete your homework. You can look at what the assignment is in case there's any special instructions that I would give there. Homework on a consistent basis, of course, is going to be due the next class period, unless I make some sort of announcement about that. But if I assign a homework assignment on Tuesday, then that homework would be due by Wednesday at the beginning of class when you come in. It's not that you're running into class and you're trying to do your assignment real quick. Please make sure that you do your assignment before you get into class. I will be checking your homework every time that we have that, so please make sure that you are doing your best. There's a couple different ways that I check homework. Either we're going to check that you just did your homework. You completed all of the questions, you gave it your best effort, and if that's the case, you would get a 100%. There will be other days where I'm going to check your homework for accuracy. Did you do your homework correctly? When we do our homework in that kind of format, we will go over correct answers together. We will have an opportunity for you to correct homework, and we'll talk about how we do that on the first day that that's going to show up there. But please make sure that you are faithfully completing your homework, as I've mentioned a few times. Then if you're doing that, you'll do just fine during this school year. I've already mentioned a few times, make sure that you are bringing your textbook, because I will try to at the end of each class period, won't be every day, but most class periods will have 5-10 minutes maybe that you can begin to work on today's assignment. Use that time. Maybe you were a little bit shy, you didn't want to ask a question in class in front of everyone. Well, that would give you a good opportunity for you to ask a question as I'm walking around and as you're completing your homework assignment. Go ahead and turn the paper over to some things on the back about ways that we'll get our grades beyond homework. Of course, we're going to have quizzes. Actually, our first quiz this week is going to be on Wednesday. As we're going through lesson 1, I'll kind of point out here some things that you'll want to know. So I do want to mention our first quiz here will be on Wednesday of this week. Of course, quizzes can be expected at any time. I will try to inform you, maybe the day ahead or as we're going over homework that day, hey, we're going to have a quiz coming up. That way you're paying attention. I mean, you should be paying attention anyway, but maybe there's a question that you've been holding on to, and that would be a great opportunity for you to ask that question. Our test, we'll have tests maybe every 3 weeks or so. I mean, that's not a hard and fast rule, but that's usually how it shows up. Tests are every 2.5 or 3 weeks. We will take a day or two before a test. We'll review together. I'll give you practice questions to try, and then that will prepare you as you're studying and as you're getting ready for your test. Please make sure during class, students, that you're doing your best to participate. I know we are a little bit different right now with you just listening to the videos. I'm not there physically with you. We'll talk about in a second what's some ways that you can participate, that you can still contact me if you need help or if you have questions. But if the teacher there that's currently with you asks a question you're able to answer, then please make sure that you're raising your hand and you're participating during class. Make sure that you're asking questions. We're all here to help you, other students, myself, the teachers that are currently there with you. But if you don't ask a question, we may not know and we may not be able to help you. So please ask questions. That's something that's very important, especially in math. If you need help, then please ask some questions. One other thing about participation, please make sure that you take good notes. You may be a student that maybe you've never taken math notes before. Taking math notes is a good thing to start getting into a good habit of doing, especially as we're getting into some of these high school classes. Things may make sense to you during class, and then you get home, you get to study hall, and you don't quite remember what we did. You don't quite remember a step from an example. But if you have things written down in your notebook, then you can go ahead and take a look back at that, and then you would be able to proceed to do your work that you have to do on your own. So things that are up on the screen, things that will be on the board, please make sure that you're writing them down. Of course, unless I say, don't worry about writing this down, other things, please make sure that you get in your notebook. If you miss class, make sure that you're contacting me, that you're talking to the teacher that's there. That way we can get you caught back up and you won't be too far behind during class. Right there at the end, you can see the different percentages that I'll be using for how to grade with your homework, your quizzes, and your test. So homework does matter, so please make sure that you're doing your homework, asking questions, studying, preparing for your quizzes and for your test. The very last thing there on our policy and procedure sheet is my email, dcherry@combat.com. Especially these first few weeks until I'm able to get back with you. If you have questions, you have homework questions, something about the lesson, please email me. I'll do my best to get back with you as soon as possible. Of course, please be patient with me there, but send me an email on homework questions, class questions, anything that I can help you with. That way that you can do your best during class. All right, at this point, we're going to go ahead and get our textbooks. So let's go ahead and pause the video for a second. If everyone will go ahead and we'll distribute our Algebra 1 textbook. The Algebra 1 textbook, just make sure everyone's getting the right one. Algebra 1 textbook, Saxon Algebra 1, located over there on the side of the room. Let's go ahead and pause, and if you guys will go ahead and get your textbook for me. All right, one thing I do need from each one of you, if you will take your textbook, and if you will open up your textbook to the very front cover here, you can see mine that I have. In the very front cover, there should be a number right here in the upper right-hand corner. Again, we're going to go ahead and pause the video in just a second, and I'd like the teacher that's there with you, if you'll go ahead and go around when they call your name, if you will tell them the textbook number that you have in that upper right-hand corner. Again, please make sure that you're giving the one like I'm pointing to in my textbook. Again, this is what it should look like. So you should be giving the number like where mine says number 6. That could be one of your textbooks that you have right now in front of you. But please make sure that you're giving this number to the teacher. The reason I would like those is that's the textbook that you're responsible for. Then if you lose your textbook, you misplaced it, you lost it in study hall, I know who that belongs to. Also, one thing while we're there, you can see this is true about my textbook that I have in front of me. If you will go ahead and you can write this maybe in pen, if you write your name, maybe the school year, you don't necessarily need to fill in the other columns, but if you write your name, the school year, and then that's another way that we can find you if you do leave your textbook. So let's go ahead and pause the video. We'll go ahead and take care of this at that time with the different numbers that we have. And once we get that done, we'll go ahead and talk about one thing, and then we'll get right into our lesson for today. All right, before we get into our lesson for this morning, I do want to mention what today's homework assignment is going to be. You're like, what, Mrs. Cherry? We're going to have homework on the very first day of school? Well, yes and no. Very simple homework assignment for you today. Maybe some of you have actually already completed it while you're sitting there working on giving the numbers of your textbook. What I would like you to do is go ahead and get some sort of cover on your textbook. Those covers, they could be those stretchy covers that you can put over the cover of your textbook. Some of you make your own covers at home, and that's perfectly fine. One thing that I do request, make sure that you do not use contact paper. Some of your English books or your history books, maybe you would put those on there because they're the softer cover books. But please make sure on this hardcover book, you use some sort of cloth cover, some sort of cover that you would use at home from a paper bag or something like that. So please make sure that you get that done. That's actually going to be a homework assignment that I'm going to check on you next week. That's going to be done by next Monday, August 23rd. You'll need to make sure that you have a textbook cover. I'll remind you each day of that. So please make sure that you do get that textbook cover on your textbook. That's all I'm going to ask for you to work on for today's assignment. You don't have one, you can find one at different stores around here. I've seen them around myself. So go ahead and get that textbook cover on. Again, you can't find one, just make your own. It's okay. Just kind of keep our books nice and neat. They get jammed into the locker, jammed into your book bags, and we want to keep our textbooks as nice and new as possible during the school year. Let's go ahead and start in the few minutes that we have left together looking at our first lesson for today. So go ahead and pull out your notebook. Hopefully you brought that with you today. If you don't, maybe go ahead and raise your hand at this point and ask for a sheet of paper. That way you can take notes on what we'll talk about here this morning. We'll continue this tomorrow with a couple things that we won't be able to get to today from lesson 1 about classifying real numbers. Again, I mentioned earlier on the video that on Wednesday of this week, we will have our first quiz, and that first quiz will be over lesson 1. I'll try to mention as I'm going through the notes, both today and tomorrow, what are some of those topics that you want to focus on to make sure that you are prepared for our quiz on Wednesday. So classifying real numbers. I'd like to begin our lesson today by looking at a couple definitions with you. The first definition I'd like to go over is what is a set. Maybe that's a word that you've heard before, but maybe not in a math concept. A set is just simply a collection of objects. So go ahead and jot that definition down in your notebook. It could be a collection of any objects. I could have a collection of the students that are sitting in the front row. I could have a collection of colors. As long as I'm grouping, you can have a collection of volleyball team members, a collection of soccer team. It doesn't matter as long as you have some sort of collection of objects. In math, notation is very, very important to make sure that we're labeling things correctly so people that are looking at our work are understanding what we're talking about. So the notation that we're going to use for our set are these braces. The items that are going to be inside of the set will be inside of our braces. We'll look at that in just a second there. So we're going to see some different sets together in a few minutes, and we'll look at what is the notation. How do we correctly write those sets together? But anytime that you write a collection of objects, we are going to use those braces. Now, what do we call the items that we put inside of our set? They are called elements. Now, that might be a word that you've heard from science class before. You have some different elements in science. Not quite the same idea here, but elements in math, those are the objects, those are the items that you have inside of your set. Those are the objects that you've been collecting to put inside of your set. We noted on the previous slide, our set symbol are the braces. So these elements are going to be what inside of our braces. What is the correct notation as we're talking about an element? It's kind of this curve looking E. Maybe you're not sure how to draw that. How I would draw that, I would put a C on my paper, and I put a line through the middle. That's just how I draw my element symbol. So we're going to see later on today in some other lessons how we'll use this element symbol. Again, an element is just an item that you have inside of your set. In math, there's some different kinds of sets that you have. The first kind of set that I would like to talk about, or the first groups of sets, are the different categories that we have. Then we're going to take one of those categories and break it down a little bit further together. The first kind, or the first type of set that you have in math, is called an empty set. Now, hopefully this one will be an easy one for us to remember. What does it mean that you have an empty set? What does it mean if something's empty? It's a set that doesn't have any elements. There's nothing that is inside of your set. Another word that we use in math sometimes, and this one's kind of a funny sounding word, a set that has nothing in it is called the null set. Okay, so that's a good definition. Hint, hint, hint. That's a good definition for us to know for our quiz on Wednesday. A set that has nothing in it is called the empty set, or you could tell me it is called the null set. There's two different ways that you could notate that you have the empty or you have the null set. One way is you can put a circle and you can put a slash through that. We'll use that symbol a couple times this year for there's no solution or there's no answer. So I have nothing that is in my set. I have nothing that's in my solution. So I can put that circle with a slash through it. Notice a second way that I can say that I have an empty set is I just put the two braces side by side. Notice in those braces, there is nothing. I do not put that circle inside of the braces, because if I put it inside the braces, then that's where I put the elements. Well, an empty set didn't have any elements, so I don't want to put anything inside the braces. I just want to have those two brace symbols side by side there. So that's our first type, or the first category of set that we have. It is called an empty set, has nothing in it. It is called the null set. Number 2, the second kind of set that we have in math is something that is called a finite set. What does that mean if something is finite? That means it has an ending. There's a limitation that you have in the set, or in whatever you're talking about. So my definition here, it says a set that has a finite or a limited number of elements. It ends. It doesn't keep going on and on. So here's an example that I gave for you of a finite set, just simply the numbers 1, 2, and 3. I have 3 elements. The first element is 1, the second element is 2, and the third element is 3. There are 3 elements. There's no more than 3. There's not less than 3. There's exactly 3. There's a finite number that we have inside of our set. Well, maybe you can think of the third one. So at number 1, we had an empty set, something that had nothing inside of it. Number 2, we had a finite set, something that has a limited number of objects. And then number 3, we have an infinite set. What does it mean that something is infinite? Like we use that word to talk about God, that God is infinite. What does that mean? That means God's always been there. He has no beginning, he has no ending. So an infinite set has an infinite number of elements. It continues to go on forever and ever. Well, how do I show that something's going to go on forever and ever in math? I use that ellipse, that dot, dot, dot that I put at the end. The dot, dot, dot could be at the beginning of the set to show that the numbers keep going off to the left. It could be over there to the right side, like I have shown in my example, but an infinite set continues to go on. What I would be looking at with an infinite set is maybe is there a pattern that I can notice? Like here on this, I see 1, 2, 3, dot, dot, dot. So what would I think would be the next number? I would assume it would be the number 4 because it just continues to go on. I can see that it's counting by ones there, 1, 2, 3. So I would assume 4 would be our next number that we would have there. So 3 main categories of sets. Number 1, an empty set, something that has nothing in it. It's completely empty. Number 2, a finite set. It ends. It has a limitation. And the number 3, something that is called an infinite set, something that continues to go on. How do I show that it go on? It has that dot, 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 either at the beginning, at the end, maybe at both sides of our set. What we're going to finish up with here this morning in class, there are 5 kinds of infinite sets that we have. This item, or these items that we're going to talk about here in the few minutes we have left, we'll finish this up tomorrow as well. These are some items as well that you want to know for your quiz coming up on Wednesday, and I'll talk about how we're going to do that. We'll do some examples together, just like you'll do on your quiz. So how are we going to classify? What are some names that we can give to numbers? What are some names for these different kinds of infinite sets that we have? As I mentioned, there's 5 different ways that we can classify, that we can title, or that we can group numbers. Number 1, the first kind that we have is called a natural number. Now, if I asked you guys to do a natural number or just to count for me, hopefully you guys would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So a good definition of a natural number are your positive counting numbers. So if I said, Ben, go ahead and count for me. Well, what does that mean? You would start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you would continue to go on and on in those positive numbers. That's how you've learned to count since you were a little kid. This is just a name that we have for those natural numbers. They're also called our counting numbers. Maybe a way that you can remember that. How would you naturally count? Well, you would naturally count with positive numbers. So you wouldn't say 0. You don't call your first object 0. You call it the number 1. You use a positive number. Here's what the natural numbers look like in our set notation. Notice my set notation, I have my braces. I began with my number 1. That's my first natural number. and 1, 2, 3, 4, and I put the ellipse, that dot, dot, dot at the end to show that my natural number category never ends. It continues to go on forever and ever. So category number 1 for how we can classify, how we can group numbers is called a natural number. With a natural number, how do I naturally count? I use positive counting numbers. Number 2, the second group or the second way that we can classify numbers is using our whole numbers. Now, the whole number category actually only has one extra number that the natural number category doesn't have. So what number might you think that would be? So we just saw positive numbers. If I only want one extra number, what would be that one extra number? It would be 0. So the whole numbers would say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. So here I have it written out in set notation. Notice the natural numbers started off with the number 1, but the whole number starts off with the number 0. It has one extra number, so it's just a little bit bigger than the first category that we've talked about. We'll see that's the case as we continue to look at these other categories. They continue to get a little bit bigger. So whole numbers, your positive counting numbers, and 0. Just a little silly way for you to remember that. If you were going to make the number 0 with your hand, what do you see in the middle of a 0? You see a whole. So your whole numbers include 0. We'll actually talk about a way that we can classify. And actually the number 0 is the only number that we would ever call a whole number in math. So natural numbers, just your positive numbers. How do I naturally count? And then our whole numbers also includes the number 0. So I did positives. I've done positives and 0. So what other kind of numbers do we have in math? We also have negatives. The next category is where we finally run into some of those negative numbers, and they are called integers. Let me go ahead and give you that definition. The integers are the positive counting numbers. Those were our natural numbers. They're opposites. So what's the opposite of a positive number? That would be a negative number, and it also includes 0. So integers, positive counting numbers, they're opposites, and 0. Here I have it written out in our set notation. Notice my dot, dot, dot is at the beginning and it's also at the end. Why is it in both locations? Because the positive numbers continue to go on to the right. The negative numbers continue to go on to the left forever. So we started with a very specific category of just positive numbers. Then we went up one number. We also included 0 when we talked about the whole numbers. Now we're getting a little bit bigger again. When we run into some negative numbers, those are the integers. Let's go ahead and quickly look at our last two categories together. We're almost out of time for this morning. So we have natural, how would I naturally count with positives. Number 2, our whole, that includes 0. Number 3, our integers, which also includes our negatives. Well, what haven't we seen yet? We haven't seen any decimals and we haven't seen any fractions. And those will show up here in our next category, which is called a rational number. At the beginning of the word rational, you can see that word ratio. What does it mean that you have a ratio? You have a fraction. So here's my definition. It says numbers that can be written as a ratio, that means a fraction of 2 integers. Well, what was an integer? It was either a positive number or it was a negative number. So I can write a fraction using positive numbers. I can write a fraction using negative numbers, or I can write a fraction using some both, one of each, one positive and one negative. So those are the fractions that we'll see in our rational number category. But what about decimals? Notice for the decimals for rational numbers, they include terminating. Well, what's that mean that things terminate? They end. So it's a decimal that ends. 0.5, 0.25. They end after a certain number. They don't continue to go on and on. Another kind of decimal that we're going to put in our rational number category are the repeating decimals. Something that continues, that pattern continues to go on. And we'll look at here on the next slide, how do we note that we have some repeating decimals? Here's some examples that I came up with for our rational numbers. So 1/2. Notice that's a fraction. So things that I can write as fractions are considered rational because it's a ratio, which is a fraction. Here's an example of my repeating decimal, 0.3, with that bar above it. The bar above means that 3 continues to go on and on forever and ever. So yes, I could use that ... but if the same thing continues to happen, then we use that repeating bar in math. Another fraction, this one I made a negative fraction, -2/3, and then a terminating decimal, 0.125. So things I can write as fractions, decimals that end, decimals that repeat are things that I would put in my rational number category. One last group of numbers that we'll talk about, then we'll wrap up here for today, are things that are called irrational numbers. Well, rational were things that I could write as a fraction, so irrational are numbers that I can't write as a fraction. There's no way that I can put this number as a fraction, so that would be considered an irrational number. Here's some other things that you can look for. It says they include imperfect roots. So what does that mean? It's a square root that you don't know. Hopefully you all would know that the square root of 9 is 3, because 3 times 3 is 9. But if I said, what's the square root of 7? I don't know, because nothing times itself makes a 7. So that's called an imperfect root, something that we don't know. Pi is also considered to be an irrational number. Yes, for pi, we normally use 3.14, but that's an approximation. Pi really is a decimal that continues to go on and on. It doesn't end, it doesn't repeat, as you can see up there on the screen there. Non-repeating, non-terminating decimals are examples of irrational numbers. Here's a few numbers that I gave you for examples, so like square root 2. I don't know what the square root of 2 is equal to because nothing times itself is 2. Here's a few other examples, a negative square root, something with a number in front of a square root, like 3 square root 3. The fourth one I have up there, the cube root of 5. Well, a cube root means I use something 3 times. So what times itself 3 times make a 5? I don't know. There is no number that exists, so that's called an irrational number. My last example there has our pi, so it's 6 pi. So we have natural numbers, how I naturally count with positives. We have whole numbers, which also includes our 0. We have integers, where we hit our negatives. Rational with fractions, and then irrational, things I can't write as fractions, decimals that don't end, they don't repeat, and square roots that we don't know, as well as for our pi. We'll look at tomorrow together some ways that we can classify. I'll give some examples together with you so we can walk through them to make sure that we're understanding how to correctly classify our numbers. So remember, for your assignment today, go ahead and start working on putting that cover in your textbook or on your textbook. That will need to be done by next Monday, August 23rd. All right, we'll see you guys tomorrow in class.